Bill, the gavel is yours whenever.
Okay, the study session will now come to order. Roll call, please.
Deputy Mayor Pelosa.
Here.
Councilmember Baggett.
Here.
Councilmember Brown.
Here.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
Oh, he's excused.
Councilmember Holman.
Here.
Councilmember Trout-Manuel.
Here.
Councilmember Wales.
Here.
Okay.
Your microphone.
Any announcement, reports, or presentations by the council? Seeing none, we'll go to item 3A, ordinance number 6723. Mr. Gross. Oh, it's not Mr. Gross, it's Mr. Doug. Oh, we don't have a table. Oh, yeah, podium, yeah, okay.
Now, how do I turn this one on? It's automatically on? Great. I don't get to speak often, so I thought I'd come to the podium. So this issue, this ordinance, deals with a historical matter that we're just trying to clean up. So it goes back to 1996, and because it goes back to 1996, I thought I would use old school presentation methods, and I just have this piece of paper to show you here. So back in 1996, before the council was an ordinance to approve a conditional use permit for a restaurant, Taqueria Mazatlan, which was located here, Auburn Way South, Chinook Elementary School. Unfortunately, when they presented the application, the legal description was off just by one word. It was northeast, and it should have been northwest. So when they described the area, described the parcel, they were actually describing a parcel over here. That error wasn't caught, the ordinance was approved, and this area over here was actually put under the conditional use permit rather than the restaurant at this parcel. And that happened, that continued on in perpetuity, and it was only this year that the error was discovered when the school district decided they wanted to buy this parcel, and the title report showed that there was a permit conditions on that parcel incorrectly. So the school district contacted the city, asked that we would correct the error, and that is the ordinance you see before you. Right now, to familiarize you with this area, instead of the Mazatlan restaurant, I think Flameburger is there now, or at least used to be recently. So the ordinance would merely change the legal description for the prior ordinance, the 1996 ordinance, and the address referenced in the 1996 ordinance, and that would clear title for the school district to purchase the property. Any questions? Thank you.
Okay, next, item 3B for boy, draft resolution number 5431. And we're ready to roll. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor Backus, council members. Amber Price, right-of-way specialist with the Public Works Department. Draft resolution number 5431 is for franchise agreement number FRN 19-0012. It's for Comcast Cable Communications LLC to be able to continue to operate and provide cable services within the city's rights-of-way. Comcast has operated in the city under various parent companies since 1978 and has applied to renew their franchise agreement. The new agreement updates terms to comply with current federal law and provides for a 10-year term. Comcast continues to provide 3 public, education, and government channels. The equipment for these channels is paid for by a 35% per subscriber per month fee the city pays for programming of these channels. Comcast also continues to provide basic services to public entities without charge, and a 30% discount from the basic service for low-income, disabled, and senior customers. Comcast's existing facilities include attachment to utility poles as well as underground installations. Engineering, construction, and restoration of the right-of-way associated with new facilities and existing facilities is reviewed and approved through the city's permitting processes that are a requirement of the franchise agreement. A public hearing is scheduled for consideration of this application for July 15th before City Council. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from council?
Thank you.
Hearing none. Thank you. Now we'll go into the section 4, which is finance, technology, and economic development discussion items. Councilmember Wales will now take over the dais in that area.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Pelosa. The first item on our agenda under Finance, Technology, Economic Development discussion items is Roman numeral A. And we have the Finance Department, not the whole department, but we have one person here to share with us the first quarter 2019 financial report.
Thank you, Councilman.
I hope you're left-handed.
No, thank you, but I'll manage.
Thank you, Councilmember Wales. Actually, Bob is going to drive the technology, and I'll drive this comfortable chair here for
great.
the presentation. And Bob, if you would please advance that one slide. This may be a little difficult to look at, but I'd like to first draw your attention to the small inlaid chart within the chart, and that is a representation of where we are relative to our year-to-date budget for revenues and expenditures for the general fund. And I'll say that general fund revenues are tracking 3% above year-to-date, while the expenditures are tracking 11% below. We'll couch that 11% number and say that we'll see some moderation in that percentage as we go into Q2. That's primarily a result of the SCORE and Valleycom payments. Typically they're made in March, but with the timing this year, they were made the first part of April. And those two represent about $1.5 million, which accounts for most of the difference in the general fund expenditures to budget. If we go to the bigger chart, I'd like to draw your attention to the two red boxes. The first one is intergovernmental revenues, and those are tracking a little bit below our year-to-date budget, and that is really a result of a reduction in the streamlined sales tax mitigation payments that we receive. Those are being offset on a dollar-for-dollar basis on any distribution that the state treasurer gives us for remote sales or internet sales. And that mitigation payment comes in through the intergovernmental revenue and not the sales tax type. The other difference that we have relates to building permits, and it's a condition that I'm seeing nationally, in that building permits are starting to go down, and so year to date this year we were down about 20 building permits relative to where we were this time last year. Bob, would you advance the slide, please? This next slide, we're looking at general fund expenditures by department. The only one that we have where we're trending negatively is in the Public Works Department, and that was caused by some unanticipated repairs and maintenance, as well as traffic control overtime related to the 15th Street Northeast Northwest project. Everything else appears to be in line. Okay, next one on the general fund revenues and expenditures. You can see that at this time of year our expenditures are above our revenues, which is not unanticipated, in that we do have a lot of initial outlays that occur for the entire year, but up front in the month of January, February. The example would be our insurance payment to Washington City's Insurance Authority. It's a one-time assessment. We make that payment. It puts us at 100% of budget in that particular category. So it's not coming in over a monthly basis. Property tax revenues, I'm pleased to say, are up over $200,000 from where we anticipated we would be in the budget. And recall that when we're setting the property tax levy, we're working off of preliminary information from the King County Assessor's Office, and they're not even finalizing their numbers until December. So it's not unheard of. Later tonight, Bob is going to present Budget Amendment number 3. And one of the elements that we're proposing to amend in that budget is the property tax revenue. Sales and use tax, we're up in the general fund. Also recall that we had a change in process where in prior years we would take the sales tax from construction and distribute that to the local street fund 103. With the budget adoption for 19 and 20, we changed that where those dollars will be retained in the general fund to continue to support operations, and we also earmarked some real estate excise tax dollars as an offset to Fund 103, or the local street fund. Utility taxes are coming in right around where we anticipated them. They're about 10,000 short of our budget, and we don't see that as any sort of issue at all. And then I'll say that, go ahead, Bob. Thank you. Cable franchise fee, again, tracking very close to where we anticipate the budget. It's about 4,000 short. And the cable utility tax, same condition. We have a difference of 6,000. We're 6,000 short to the year-to-date budget. Business licenses, you see by the dotted line that's above the solid mark, that was the 2018 trend line. The solid black line within the shaded area is 2019. And what we have there is a lot of people, or businesses I should say, purchased their 2019 business license at the tail end of 2018, and you can see that huge spike there that represents that activity. So we're okay. The building permits. I already talked about that a little bit, but out of the permits that we issued during the quarter, 53% were for commercial permits and 47% were for non-residential. Intergovernmental revenues, already talked about that. I will just add that for the first quarter, we did receive $148,000 in remote sales tax, so not a bad number. Charges for services. So recall that we also had another process change with the 2019-2020 budget where in 18 we would charge support department activity, and when I say support department activity, it's legal, HR, and finance. We charge a portion of them directly to general fund, and then we charge a portion of them directly to any other fund that they were providing support. So if I use myself as an example, 60% of my salary and benefits were charged to general fund, and 10% were charged to each of the utilities. So water got 10%, sewer got 10%, solid waste got 10%, storm got 10%. Effective January 1st of 2019, we changed that where 100% of my salary now gets charged to the general fund, and the general fund charges an assessment, a support assessment to those funds. So now 100% of my salary goes to general fund, and the water fund is getting a bill for 10%, sewer is getting a bill for 10%, so on and so on. So those payments are showing as revenue, and that's why you're seeing an increase in charges for services. Development service fees, we've had some higher than anticipated activity in plan check, zoning, and subdivision. And some of the projects that were driving that were the Auburn Elementary School number 15, Young's Market. There were some projects at the outlet collection, and finally, a single-family residential subdivision with 44 units, Carbon Trails, also had some activity. On the culture and recreation side, we're trending above, and this is a result of higher green fees or green fee revenue, as well as increased ticket sales at Auburn Avenue Theater. Fines and penalties, we're right on track there, so we have nothing to add. Miscellaneous revenue. This is where we're going to show interest that we're making on our investments, facility rentals, golf cart rentals, and the like. And those, generally are right on track. Where we've got a little bit of an increase is in some one-time activity, and it's something that we don't necessarily budget for. And that's if I'm driving along and I take a fire hydrant out, and the city says, Kevin, you need to reimburse us for that fire hydrant. That's where those payments are going to come in. So we had about $47,000 worth of activity there. Real estate excise tax, this can be one of those activities. It's always kind of hard to forecast because it's dependent upon real estate transactions. But year to date through Q1, we're plus 200,000 there, which is good. We'll continue to monitor that, but that was really driven by, we had an assisted living facility, an auto dealership, an auto repair, and then several multifamily complexes where real estate transaction was finalized during the first quarter. Okay, this slide is looking at pet licensing revenues, and actually AVHS they had a 41% increase in the number of licenses that they sold in the first quarter compared to 2018, and that is what's driving up the difference there, and we're bringing in more than what we had thought we would at this time of year. And actually the next three slides are going to look at Arterial Street.
I know. I'm going to wait until he's done with this before we go into capital. Then I'm going to ask for your questions. Before we start capital, Bill Pelosa has a question for you.
Okay, thank you.
No? I'm happy to see that the pet licenses have finally surged forward. It's been many, many years now, so apparently the new system is starting to work. So that's good. The other question I have is, now that Ms. Coleman is gone off the board of the Human Services, Humane Society Services, who's going to be on the board representing the city?
Deputy Mayor Pelosa, so the finance, I would assume that the finance director would continue to do that.
Okay.
I attended last Thursday's board meeting for Shelley.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Any other questions before we move into capital projects?
Okay, great. Thank you. So the next three slides are looking at the arterial street, the local street, and the arterial street preservation funds. And in all cases, those are trending below Q1 budget year to date. Having said that, I would say that that's not uncommon given that most of those activities tend to occur in fair weather situations. And this slide also brought back that brutal memory of several inches of snow that we all contended with in February. I would anticipate that we're going to see a turnaround, particularly with the Q3. And I think generally we tend to spend about 50% of our expenses in the last 4 months, which again isn't unreasonable given that they're fair weather activities. Okay, now I'd like to transition to the utility funds and primarily looking at the water revenues. And this chart's maybe a little bit difficult to see, but you notice that the solid green bar on the bottom part kind of dipped below the dotted green line. The dotted green line represents 2018. The solid represents 2019. And the same holds true for the blue lines up above. Again, dotted is 18, solid is 19. And really, this is a function of another change that we made effective January 1st, where we moved from billing water on a bi-monthly basis or every 2 months to a monthly basis. And so that did require a certain number of adjustments. And so we wound up, taking some of the January consumption numbers and having to roll them back into the December billing so we could get everybody on the same cycle and do away with the 2-month billing. So overall, the water revenues are right where we thought they would be and are comparable to 2018 because we also had a rate increase that went into effect January 1st. Okay, the next slide is just a representation of the types of solid waste that are being generated by the various customer classes. Our residential customers represent 90% of our total customer accounts. Commercial comes in at 8% and multifamily at 2%. And you can see in that upper left-hand chart that we've got pretty good diversion in the waste stream from residential, and we might have a little bit of work for the commercial class down in the bottom. So highest percentage is residential at 44% diversion. As I mentioned, the commercial class represents 8% of total customers, yet they generate 53% of total solid waste tonnage. So just an interesting graph. Next up, looking at the cemetery, revenue is down slightly compared to 2018, and that is really a function of we've got a little decreased activity in terms of lot sales and marker sales. And we'll close it out with the purchase order and P-card transactions. You can see by this chart that we're fairly close to 2018, and don't see anything that's jumping out at us here. And while I don't have a slide, I know you do have in your packet information on the city's investments. Let me see what page that was. That was on page 99 of your packet. Recall that our benchmark that we shoot for in terms of investment return is a 6-month treasury, and we've made a little progress on it, but we're still falling short, and I think the explanation I offer will put it into perspective. So I just pulled up the U.S. Treasury yield curve rates for the day, and the 6-month is yielding 2.10. We don't get a higher yield on the Treasury curve until we hit the 20-year mark, and the city's investment policy only allows investments out to a maximum of 5 years. So we've got this interesting situation where short-term rates are high, and where we're operating with our investments, it's low. The good news is that those short-term rates are coming down, and some of these investments that I've listed already exceed that 6-month mark. So we should have a different story in the second quarter to report and share. And that concludes my presentation.
Do we have capital questions or general questions at this time? Thank you very much. Thank you. Now we're going to move on to ordinance number 6720.
Good evening. I'm going to fumble around here for a minute. So I don't have a PowerPoint. I was going to talk from your packet materials, and specifically it's Schedule A in the materials. I don't have page numbers on your material. There are page numbers on Schedule A. So I'll start on the first page there. Which is the general fund. Do you all have that?
Okay. 111.
So let me just introduce the whole topic of the budget amendment number 3 and say that the general purpose of this amendment is to update the beginning fund balances for 2019 to match what we actually had as the results from 2018 now that the books are closed. But in addition to those, we have some other changes, and I'll go through each of those. I wasn't planning to go through in any detail the adjustments for the beginning fund balance, but if you have kind of general questions or even specific questions, I'd be happy to answer those. So I was going to start out with, on page 1, sorry. We have the increase in budgeted property tax receipts. So that is, as Kevin was describing, we are already above budget expectations in terms of property tax receipts. So we wanted to update the revenue budget as we normally do for large known increases or decreases if we have them. So we are intending to raise property tax receipt budget by $275,000. And similarly, the amount of revenue that we received from the Muckleshoot tribe for casino services is going to be above budget. We know that. That's a known quantity. They have accepted our higher than normal amount, and so we're expecting an additional $370,000 over budget in that regard. In dealing with the Community Development Department, we have a relatively small Department of Ecology grant to complete the city's shoreline master plan. That was a 2018 grant for $25,000. About $9,000 and change was spent in 2018, and so this is the balance of that grant, roughly $15,400. We also have a even smaller budget for some training. So what this is we hired a consultant for, I think, $8,900 to do some training for staff, and it allowed us to also offer that to other cities and other agencies in the area. And so we charged them for that service, and the amount that we received from those other agencies, it was $8,800, so virtually the entire thing was paid for by that activity. In the police department, we have a couple of items here. There's the continued funding for the second school resource officer. So that was, again, a 2018 approved activity. In BA number 6, we already budgeted the revenue, so this is the expenditure side of that. We also have budget for a third school resource officer that was requested by the school district. They're going to fund 70% of the cost of the officer and also provide a grant for $60,000 towards the purchase of the vehicle for the officer. So this is the personnel cost side of it. You'll see later on, you'll see the purchase of the vehicle.
Councilmember Brown?
Thank you, Councilmember Wales. Just a question about that. For the third resource officer, I see no new FTE.
Correct.
So does that mean that the police officer that would be assigned as a school resource officer will be reassigned? Is that correct?
Reassigned from current duty. We are not backfilling for that, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know if you want to address that, but no, okay.
All right.
We also have a small grant from the Washington Associations of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs for a speed feedback sign. I presume this is the one that tells me that I'm going too fast. On the next page, we have Public Works Department. We have a couple of items there. One is, and I think Kevin also referred to this as well, we have an increase in the number of traffic signals that are being damaged by vehicles. And so this is to add the expenditure budget to cover that and the expected revenue from the insurance recoveries on that. So we have to upfront the money to pay for the damages, and then we get reimbursed after the fact. There's also a budget for the East Auburn Access Project. That's going to be funded by the Muckleshoot Tribe. They're the leads on the project. They're looking for some technical assistance from the city on that. We're going to hire out a portion of that to an outside consultant, but the rest of it will be done by in-house staff.
Councilmember Troutman.
I have a question on that $100,000 for accidents. Do we have very many of them?
So this is the SR 164 SR 18 East Auburn Access, formerly known as the eastbound off-ramp for SR 18. So the $100,000 is to reimburse the city for staff time and some consultant assistance in looking at the technical process that we're going through with the tribe right now.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Oh, Councilmember or Deputy Mayor Pelosa.
The same item, Ingrid. Is this covered by insurance?
So the first item in that list, which is the traffic signals, those are primarily insurance recoveries that we do. So similar to what Kevin was talking about earlier on the overruns that we have in Public Works, that's because of the repairs that we are doing for traffic signals and or light standards that are getting hit, and then we recover insurance. For the East Auburn Access Project, that is a Connecting Washington project through the legislature.
Thank you.
Okay, under Admin Department, we have a very small grant from the Hotel Motel Tax Fund for the 2019 geocaching event. And then in non-departmental, we are reducing the estimate, the budget for Left 1 benefit expenditures for two purposes. One is to better reflect what we've historically seen, and the other is to match up closer with the actuarial study that was done recently. And so we need to, we can take advantage of a lower budget amount on that. The last item here is the beginning fund balance adjustment, which I said I wasn't going to talk about, but in this case I do need to, because at the same time that we're increasing the beginning fund balance to account for that, we're also taking out the contra expenditure item that we have in the budget currently. So just to refresh your memory from the budget process, the contra account is essentially a negative expenditure, and we put that in there to reflect the fact that we know that we're going to have under expenditures during the year. We just don't know exactly where they're necessarily going to come from. So they're always going to happen. We just can't pinpoint them. Otherwise, we would address those line items specifically. So we put an item in here, and in this case, we didn't do it kind of after the fact, which is what we normally do. We normally budget all the expenditures and all the revenues, and then at the end, we say, oh, we're going to have additional under expenditures, and we account for that in the forecast piece. But in this case, we had, if we didn't take them out of the budget through the contract expenditure, then we would have dropped below, according to the budget, we would have dropped below the target 8% reserve requirement. Even though we know that wasn't real, so we put in the contract expenditure. And so here we're taking it out because now we have the known amount of net under expenditures. And I would just add that we intend to do the same thing next year. Is that confusing enough? So on the next page, you have the Arterial Street Fund, Fund 102. We have the beginning fund balance adjustment. We have an increase of funding for sidewalks on Auburn Way South, and that's due in part to some new Department of Transportation requirements and also some cost increases that we foresee. So that's $75,000. We're looking for some funding for the Auburn Way South widening project, and this is going to be funded by a combination of new grants and traffic impact fees. So the design is going to happen in 2020 and 2021, right-of-way acquisition following that, and construction sometime around 2023.
Councilmember Pelosi?
Ingrid, I've noticed around the city we're putting in new ramps on the curbs. Can you give us a little update on that and where the money is coming from?
So it depends upon which project we're talking about. So we have several projects going on right now that involve sidewalk improvements that include curb ramp replacements. We have our own sidewalk repair replacement program, which is funded from REIT funds. And then we have several grants that are going on right now. So Auburn Way North is a TIB grant that is funding that project. And then we also have another project that will be starting here on Auburn Way South for sidewalks, which is another TIB grant.
Thank you. Overall, what is coming out of our sidewalk account?
So for this year, we had $200,000 budgeted out of REIT funds for this year, plus some carry forward from last year for the project that was planned that is under construction.
So we're actually not counting all the grants, et cetera. What's coming out of that budget?
Yeah, I don't know that I have the exact number off the top of my head for this year, but it's around $200,000 is what we budget every year.
Okay, thank you, appreciate it.
Lastly, we have the correction of a contractor payment. This was done in 2018, which is why it's coming before you today. It should have been in the Water Capital Fund, Fund 460, was entered in that fund. It should have been in Fund 102, the Arterial Street Fund, so here we're just correcting that. Under the Hotel Motel Tax Fund on the same page, at the very bottom, you see that there's this is the other side of the LTAC grant for the geocaching that I mentioned earlier. Next page, we have the Arterial Street Preservation Fund, Fund 105. And there we have the transfer of reserved REIT funds for arterial street preservation projects. So if you remember from 2017 and 18, there was discussion and we set aside $2.6 million, I believe, for arterial street preservation projects. And the bulk of it was used in 2018, and the balance we're going to use this year, $699,400, is being transferred as part of this amendment. Under the Drug Forfeiture Fund, Fund 117, we have a fairly small adjustment. It's to reflect the police collective bargain agreement, and the only reason that we're doing something this small in this case is that the fund itself is pretty small, and so this kind of thing could tend to make that fund go over expenditure budget, and that's a no-no. The next page, we have the mitigation fees fund, Fund 124. And I think we've got these already been discussed. We've got the, this is the $200,000, which in combination with the grant funds will fund the Auburn Way South widening project. And then we also have $50,000, which is needed for the Brannan Park synthetic infield project. That was due to some unforeseen issues with the soil. Costs are going to be higher than expected, so that's what we're going to do. And those would be covered by park impact fees. And then the other side of it is under the Parks Construction Fund, Fund 321. You see the same dollar amount, and this is just spending that money that's just being transferred in. Next page, you have Fund 328, the Capital Improvements Fund. I've already discussed both of those items. And then we also have the Water Fund, Fund 430. Here we have two drinking water revolving fund loans. So we have an existing one from 2018, I believe it was, $1.3 million. And that was for the Coal Creek Springs Transmission Main Replacement Project. And in the early stages of design, that was discovered that the proposed approach, which was some directional drilling, and I'll defer to somebody else on that one, but that was not determined to be feasible. So this is being converted from a construction grant or construction loan to a design-only loan in the order of $300,000, and so this reflects that change. And the other side of this change you'll see in Fund 460, which is the capital fund for water. We also have a new drinking water revolving fund loan for $3 million, and that's to replace lead service lines and the associated water mains. So this will allow us to be a lot more aggressive and replace those sooner than we had normally planned. Next page, we have the airport fund. There's one change there, and that's to revise the revenues and expenditures associated with aviation fuel sales. We're expecting more dollars in that regard. I've already discussed the water capital fund items, Fund 460, so I'll skip over those. On the next page, we have Fund 560, which is the equipment rental capital fund. Have a couple of items there. We have two message board units, which are past their useful lives, but they've already been paid for through annual collections, so we recover all of our replacement costs in advance, so we have those funds available to us. And so this is the purchase of those. We have a vehicle for the third school resource officer. I already mentioned that. And then we have a man lift and trailer for the facilities department. This was somehow funded in terms of the transfer from facilities to this fund in the budget, but the expenditure authority to actually spend it out of this fund was not, so this corrects that. And then we have the IT capital fund, Fund 568. That's the vehicle electronics for that third school resource officer. I guess I mentioned that. That's all part of the vehicle. And then on the last page, we have the fire pension fund. And here's another very small fund with a small adjustment that we're making because we know that it's going to cost $5,000 additional to pay for the actuarial services. And once again, that could be enough to send this fund to be over budget, and we don't want to do that. So that, in a very brief nutshell, is budget amendment number 3. Are there questions that I could answer?
Thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome.
We're now going to move to item C, a very timely item as we've been following the news and our own food bank. Cybersecurity update.
Good evening, Council. Deputy Mayor Pelosa, Mayor Backus. Tonight I'm going to talk about everybody's favorite subject, cybersecurity. And as Councilmember Wales said, it is a very timely talk with everyone. U.S. Cyber Command over the weekend launched some very sophisticated attacks against some other country. And then today we had major announcements from Homeland Security for local governments, cities, municipalities, utilities to be on the lookout for some of these things. So in the last time I met with you, when I did my IT update, one of the things that we talked about was cybersecurity. We kind of glanced over and how we're looking at protecting the city from some of these threats. One of the things I want to start off with, though, is Teresa should have handed out, I think, one of these things. We've kind of put this together so that we can hand out to new employees, we can hand out to people around the city, some of our communities that are targets for these types of crimes. It's a great resource for a lot of people, and it goes into some pretty good detail on what to do from a personal status, and some of the things we can do from a professional stance too. Before I go any further, though, does anybody have any questions about this? I know you just got them, but this was kind of talked about in the last discussion, and I just wanted everybody to kind of have a copy for themselves.
I really think that the cyberbullying one would be incredible if we could get it to the schools and to our kids. It's really written in their language and appears to be very useful. Might be something our junior council want to look at.
Sure.
Got to make sure you get a copy.
I can get you a copy too. I have some more up there. All right, so let's get started. So I want to start off with a quote from Einstein. And it goes, "If you can't explain it simply, then you don't understand it well enough." And the reason I wanted to kind of go over that is cybersecurity we get into a lot of details. And I wanted this group, I want to stay as high level as I possibly can so that you guys can understand the business strategy and the business decisions that eventually you'll have to make if some of these things happen, and not necessarily the technical details of some of the cybersecurity stuff that we're gonna go over. So what is cybersecurity? The dictionary explains it as measures taken to protect a computer or computer system against unauthorized access or attack. So why is that important? There was a recent study that was just released by Accenture, which is a big technology group, that outlined the top threats that organizations face. And those are malware, and malware is any application that's created that can cause havoc on a machine. Ransomware are great examples of those things, and we'll talk about some of that. Web-based attacks, those are attacks that are coming at our public-facing systems, like our GIS systems, our public website. Denial of service, those are attacks that come at us that basically they send so much information at our public website, let's say for example, that nobody else can get to it. So those are the types of attacks we're looking at. Malicious insiders, hopefully in the course of as we go through this and the history of the city, we don't have any malicious insiders, but one of the biggest threats that corporations face and large cities face are somebody on the inside being a little disgruntled and doing something that they have access to or attacking something that they have access to. From a security standpoint, we usually put this perimeter around our networks from the outside. We're facing everything. And we don't typically look at the inside of what people on the inside could do because we think that they're employees, we can trust them. And as we go through some of these exercises, we realize that you can't always trust an employee. They may have malicious intent also. Social engineering, this one's very tricky. Some of you have experienced some of these things. These are the emails, the phone calls, the, hey, I'm so-and-so, please help me. And they're very well crafted. The emails are very well crafted. The phone calls are very well crafted. We talked about some of this in my last discussion with you about the spam calls that are coming, and they're asking you to update your social security numbers and those kind of things. So social engineering is a big issue, especially when we spend a lot of money on protecting digital assets. We put, firewalls, infrastructure in place to protect all of the technical threats. But sometimes all it takes is for somebody to just walk in a door with somebody else. They call it piggybacking. Somebody opens the door and we just let people right into the building sometimes because our nature is to be nice and we hold doors open for people. Well, sometimes that's all it takes for that person to gain access into the building, and now it doesn't matter how much money we spent on protecting the assets, they just walk right in and take whatever they would like. Part of that study that was released stated that the average cost of crime in 2018 of these cyber crimes is around $13 million. And as we kind of talk about this and when we move forward, you'll see why this is happening. It's an increase of about 12% last year and 72% over the last 5 years. These increases, if you think about it, it's lucrative. They wouldn't do it if they weren't getting paid for some of this stuff. Criminals wouldn't be attacking us if they weren't getting paid. There are some conversations happening in legislature right now talking about if we made it illegal to pay, then a lot of that stuff would go away because you would lose the incentive to criminalize this. I wanted to look at kind of the cost framework, and if I'm going too fast, just slow me down. I know it's a lot to understand. One of the things we look at from an IT stance is what is our detection methods? How do we investigate if we detect something? How do we contain it? And that's basically how do we reduce the spread of it? We do not want it to take out the entire system, but if something comes in, can we contain it into a smaller pool? And then the biggest piece of this is the recovery. If something does happen, can we recover those systems, and what is our timelines for those recoveries? On the other side of this is the external consequences and costs. Some of the things that we have to think about from a cyber attack or a cyber crime are information loss or theft. So, are those user accounts, usernames and passwords, financial information, stuff coming out of the finance software, stuff coming out of our billing systems. Business disruption. We can't do billing anymore. Those kind of things. What would the impacts be if we could not do billing or we couldn't accept payments? Equipment damage. That's if a system is attacked, can we bring that system back online, or did we get infected with something that makes that machine inoperable for the rest of its life, which means we would have to replace it. And then the other piece, the biggest one that on this list is revenue loss. How much money would the city lose if all the systems went offline and we couldn't bring it back, let's say for 2 days, 5 days, 10 days, 2 months? How much money would the city lose? And we'll get to a couple of these examples here in a couple minutes, but just kind of think about those things as we move forward. One of the biggest threats that we have from how the stuff's getting into us, so the way that we're seeing that attack is through email. And the reason email is so easy is we can get an email from anywhere. We can get an email from anyone at any time. On average, we're tracking around 20,000 emails a day for the city. If you think about that, that's a lot of communications. That's people sending us emails, that's internally sending emails, and us sending emails outbound. So what is our strategy around this? So one of the things that we know we can't do is we can't do it alone. We have to have partners. So we have reached out to the State Auditor's Office, which offers a great service for helping us understand our cyber stance. Last year, the council was presented a report from the State Auditor's Office, and they've outlined a great deal in detail of things that we need to work on or put in some risk mitigation around. The other thing is emergency management, not only our own emergency management, but Pierce County Emergency Management, King County Emergency Management. Working with our emergency manager, we have put together a new cybersecurity portion of the CEMP. We've also worked with Pierce County Emergency Management. They recently offered a tabletop cybersecurity exercise, which was well received. They gave us, out of that tabletop, we received a pretty comprehensive, what they call a concept of operations plan, that we can just utilize whenever these types of, if one of these events were to happen. Also, as part of that, we learned some new resources within Homeland Security itself, understanding that there are groups within Homeland Security that are, their sole purpose is to help cities like us, not in the event of an attack, but the preemptive help of some of those attacks. If something does happen, they will also help us in the event of attack. And one of our bigger partners, which I just recently met with to understand our full policy, is our insurance, WCIA, our insurance. I don't want to go into any of the details of that insurance plan, but just know that we are ensuring that any type of situation is covered within that plan.
Okay, Councilmember Trout Manuel.
How connected are we with all of our emergency people, like our police department, HR, just all of our main units? Are we connected with them in one hub, or?
So we are a very connected city, and I think what you're asking about is it a fusion center?
Yes.
So we do operate out of a fusion center, and maybe the police officers can help us with this a little bit. I don't want to put you on the spot, I'm sorry. But we do operate out of one out of the state. There are some confidential things that are surrounding that. So I would prefer to kind of limit our discussion about it a little bit, and if we want to get into more detail, we can talk offline.
Just within our city, if say we got attacked, our city got attacked, and is it going to attack all the other branches that we're all together with, like our police department and across the street, you know, utilities and everything? So are we all protected under the same umbrella?
So we are connected from a technical stance. There are things that we have put in place to, like I said, limit the scope of who can talk to who and when and why. Some of the sophistication, though, of these attacks that are being seen around the United States, it doesn't really matter. If they want to attack us, they will attack us. Like I said, our stance is we are trying to mitigate how far that attack goes. So that kind of answer what you're saying. So we are connected. If a police officer's machine is infected, that could potentially get to the mayor's office if some of these things aren't working.
One of the things that I'm concerned about, and I probably would get attacked and not even know it, but is the loss of data. And one particular city number of months ago decided that it wasn't going to pay the ransom and spent 3 times that amount re-entering the data. So my question is, I'm sure we back up our data daily, probably more than that. How can you lose data when it's backed up all the time?
So it depends on the scenario, but if one of the things that we're seeing in some of the recent attacks is it's not just the data that so when they say they can't get back to data, all the computers don't work. Oh. So if you can't get to any of the computers to even access your backups,
okay,
right? That's the dilemma of some of this. So they take hostage everything. That's their intent. Okay. So to recover the backups, you may have to have access to the system, and if you don't have access to the system, it's kind of this.
Thank you.
So,
thank you.
Perfect.
Deputy Mayor Pelosi.
So, in your opinion, what are they getting out of this?
Money.
When they hack us?
They're getting money. So that's what we're seeing in the municipalities are they hold what's called ransom. They hold us ransom. They say, give us, and a great example is, let's see if I have the write-up here. In Florida recently, I think we talked about one of the other ones. In Florida recently, they had 310 computers were implicated, so loss of 310 computers, 90 laptops, all their servers, and they asked to get it all back. The hackers asked for $941,000. The city decided to pay $603,000. just to get it back so that they could start the process of recovery. And the last I read, they were still looking at getting some of those services back online. City of Sammamish, a local city, they were hit with the same type of ransomware. So, you know, it's getting closer and closer to home for us. So we're, you know, especially with some of the stuff we're seeing in the news lately, I think that, you know, it's all about money.
Okay.
It's all about money. And that's where, like I said earlier, working with our partners to make sure that we can mitigate some of this, that's what our strategy is.
Councilmember Trout Manuel.
We're insured, the city's insured for something like that, aren't we?
Yes.
He said that earlier.
It depends on the scenarios, but again, I think that conversation, we can talk.
Okay.
We can talk afterwards.
Yeah. Thank you.
But we are covered for things. So going back to the mitigation strategy itself, one of the things we've done just recently is worked with one of our partners to do a full infrastructure analysis, and that's kind of the piece that you were talking about earlier of if one place is attacked, what is the footprint of that? So we are fully in an analysis with that group to give us some data to understand what our current state is of our infrastructure. The other thing we're doing are internal security reviews. So that's how we're sharing data, how we're sending emails, how we're moving things around the infrastructure in a secure fashion or a not secure fashion. Data protection and encryption. So that's taking the data from a clear text, read-only formats, and making sure that when I move it from point A to point B, it's encrypted into a way that nobody can see it or grab it on the network. One of the other cool things that we're doing right now is we've deployed some artificial intelligence into the environment that every day, 24/7, it's monitoring all of our anomalies and all of our subsystems to ensure that what is supposed to happen from point A to point B or from point B to point C is actually happening. And it tracks all of those anomalies. So anytime something outside of normal happens, we in IT get automatic alerts so that we can start tracking and turning off systems to reduce that threat. It's a pretty cool system that we've got there, and I'd love to show some people one-on-one on that. The other piece that we're starting to work on are whitelisting and blacklisting technologies. So blacklisting is your antivirus software that it's known things, it's known to the community, it's known to the world, and we have systems on machines that say if it's known to the world, we're going to block it too. So that's a blacklisting technology. Whitelisting is kind of the flip side of that. Whitelisting is we only trust, in certain scenarios, the things that we say we trust. Anything else can't run, won't work, it just stops. Between those two technologies, we've basically taken the ability for malware or viruses or anything to come into a workstation and dropped it down to about 99% chance of failure. So I say 99% because there's always that one little piece of chance that something's going to get in and something's going to do that harm. Any questions on those?
One of the things that I really appreciate is on my iPad, I've noticed that occasionally I get contacts from outside of the system, and it says this is coming from outside of the system, which causes me to pause and see if this is something I really want to accept. So I do appreciate that.
Yeah, that is, thank you. That's a technique that we kind of taken from some of our partners who said this is a good thing. And it does give you that one last chance to pause and go, wait a minute. And it really came out about those times that the council was starting seeing a lot of the spear phishing exercises where we didn't know for sure if it was internal, external, unless you do some investigating on that. Now you know it came from the outside for sure. So perfect. So to wrap this up, I just wanted to kind of point out that, cybersecurity is not just IT, it's everybody. We talked about social engineering. That's you, it's everybody in the city. So, we have to make sure that we always do our due diligence to provide, physical security versus technical security. The other thing that I wanted to point out in the wrap-up, though, is recently, within the last week, we deployed a new security technology for our email, inbound, outbound, and interdepartment email systems. Like I said, our biggest threat from stuff coming in is through email, 20,000 on average per day. In the last week, we have stopped 466 emails that contained malware. Of those 466, we had 2 users that clicked on 4 links that if we weren't putting these systems in place would have taken down the entire city or potential of the city. When we look at cybersecurity and some of the costs of how, putting in these systems, it's minute compared to the cost that we would pay if we didn't have these systems in place. So with that, I just want to thank the council for your continued support in some of these programs that we put in. I know that I'm new to the city, and I know that you guys have done a lot of great work to address cybersecurity and computer systems. So I appreciate that.
Okay. Councilmember Holman.
Thank you, Lario. David, I was reading an article about the promise of dual operating systems and dual virtual simultaneous backup systems. I know the duplication of that would be very expensive, but you're looking at infrastructure, and I know critical systems like banks use it. How would that work for us?
So it's a great question. We are actively as part of that infrastructure analysis, we are looking at how we better protect from what we call our replication sites. So we do have replication systems in place to do exactly what you're talking about. They are just getting, the issues we run into is there's so much data to replicate and to make backups of and copies of in those replications. We're working as part of that infrastructure plan to increase some of the bandwidth, for example, between those replication sites. But, we look back at the 9/11 attacks and some of those financial systems that, went offline and were back online within hours. And that technology has been around since then. And the rest of, non-financial corporations are now catching up to some of those techniques. And learning from Homeland Security really helps us, track down how we best replicate that data in a timely manner. So we are doing it already, and we will get better at it.
Just be ready for a big bill.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And at this time, I'll turn the meeting over to Deputy Mayor Pelosa.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Wales. Good job. Are there any other any other discussion items from the council that you want to bring forward now? Any new business that you want to bring forward now? Okay, hearing none, we'll go to our matrix. And we currently have 4 items on our matrix. Is everyone satisfied with those matrix items as shown?
I have a question.
Sure.
Shows under the council matrix, under the municipal services or the yellow, it shows on the municipal services area, number 4, it shows on July 8th, a presentation of animal control update, and it's not indicated as such on the special focus area sheet. So which prevails? The date here or the date
Oh, I see what you're
here?
saying. I see what you're saying.
So is July 8th
Yeah, July,
being
yeah.
Public Works and Community Development?
So July the 8th. Yeah, Mayor, go ahead.
And July 22nd is the date.
So when it was moved from the Public Works over to Municipal Services, the date did not get changed.
Okay.
It was just a transfer over, so Teresa will make the correction to
So what
that date. So it will be the July 22nd.
Okay,
Super.
July 22nd.
Special focus area.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Mayor. Any other, yes, Bob?
While we're on that particular subject, it also still shows that DeCoursey and Baggett are the chair and vice chair. It probably should be under the Muni Services chair and vice chair.
What do you? So under the red,
No, under the yellow. Animal control.
Yes, it doesn't change.
oh,
It's Brown and Pelosi.
Yeah, it wasn't changed.
Brown and Pelosi.
Right, thank you.
Thank you for picking that up.
Yep.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments, corrections? Does any of the council members want to add an item of significance to them?
No, not until we talk to, I'm sorry, there's an issue that we were, I'm sorry. We were talking about last study session that we would like to bring to the council, but we need to sit down and talk to Pat Bailey. And Pat was going to talk to the mayor and Dana, and then once they get a chance to talk, then she'll let us know if we'll bring it to the council. Okay, so we're putting that on hold for now.
All right, sounds good. Again, any further additions, deletions by the council? All right, hearing none. We're adjourned.